this is Tom for Tabletop Tap Room, and today we're doing the foundations of the Satanic Panic. I had previously done a video. I was watching this guy who had um, made a comment of like, yeah, Satanic Panic was nothing, and then he turned around and was like, yeah, my books were burned multiple times. My parents banned me from the game store, and he's telling. So on one side, when it was convenient, he told one story, and on the other. So I did a video called "The Lies We Tell About the Satanic Panic," and and I invited people. I says my positions is for the most part, it feels to me like it was for the most part overblown, not completely overblown, but for the most part overblown. And a lot of you commented on the video, and there was also a lot of comments in Facebook groups where I posted the video. And I read all those, and it's like, oh, maybe there's a little bit more to what people experienced. However, I went back and did my research. My previous research was on a older computer from a couple of computers ago, I guess, from 2009, prior to 2009, and so it was not available to me anymore. And I redid and I actually came up with new information. And I feel like today's the day that I really should hit some of this. So I would like to do. Now I recorded this video and it was an hour long, and I thought way too long. Let's chop it up. So we're going to be doing today. We will be doing the foundations of the Satanic Panic. The next time we will be doing the truth and consequences of the Satanic Panic. Maybe some of the unintended consequences, things that came out of the Satanic Panic. I think those things are interesting. And then the legacy of the Satanic Panic. And I've got some things to say to some specific groups when we get there, but we'll save that for then. So before we get too deep into this, let me just say thanks for watching the video. Thanks to my subscribers. You guys are great. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and bell icon. Help me build the channel. Moving right along, I've got a Venn diagram. Where are we? Right here. And this Venn diagram shows the 4 recognized groups who took part in the Satanic Panic, but it leaves out a couple of groups. There's a couple more groups. We'll talk about those. So you see in this Venn diagram that it's an unusual fusion of these 4 groups. You have the church, you have the police, you have social workers, you have government. And one of these things ain't like the others. As the old Sesame Street thing goes. One of these things ain't like... All right, it's the church. Okay, because you can see the connective tissue between the police, social workers, and the government. Because, the government provides the money for the social workers to do their thing. Their budget comes from the government, and the police's budget comes from the government. And sometimes the police and the social workers work together. So there's plenty of connective tissue there for us to see the relationship between those 3 groups. The oddball here is the church, and there's not a lot of connective tissue between the church and these other 3 groups. But these are the 4 groups. And then there's a 5th group that got on board with the Satanic Panic, and that would be journalists. Primarily, one journalist is pretty famous. The other journalists are in another country and wrote for tabloids, for yellow journalism magazines, basically the National Enquirer of that country. And they jumped on board. And that, to me, is actually one of the funniest stories from the 1990s concerning the Satanic Panic. That one cracks me up, but it's my favorite. But we will get there. That is 2 videos from now. So we're looking at these groups. And then there's a group that's often overlooked, and that is the group of nerds and gamers. They're oftentimes they feel like they are the ones who are being put upon by one group in particular here, the church. So there's a little bit of an animosity there between the church, and I doubt there's very many gamers who are like, yeah, those effing social workers, I hate them. No, they're not. It's always the church. So we want to look at the 3rd video as well. So these are our 4 primary groups. I think it's oft overlooked. Gamers and nerds are overlooked, and I don't think that they should be because they are part of this and they had a role to play. And I do want to address gamers and nerds at the end of the third video a little bit. So let's start with what are the foundations of the Satanic Panic. Now, you had some influences that had very strong influences upon the Satanic Panic, and we'll talk about those, but they are not foundational to it. The first foundation of the Satanic Panic, three movies: Rosemary's Baby, 1968, The Exorcist, 1973, and The Omen, 1976. And these are interspersed between several other events, but let's talk about these three things together. Because you had in these movies the very similar ideas about a satanic cabal and plots by a satanic conspiracy to do things, and they were under the cover, and they had people in high places, and they worked under the cover, and they had these plots, and they, and these movies presented this idea that there was satanic ritual abuse out there, and that there was a satanic cult out there, and they were plotting and they were doing things. And these movies are just works of fiction, but it put this idea out there. And you have to stop and think about what role movies really fulfill in society. See, it used to be that you'd have a bard and he'd come around and he'd play the lute and he'd recite poetry and sing songs. And that was how we got our legends and our stories. And then we had this English guy called the Bard, but he was a playwright, and he wrote all these plays, and they got published. And so everybody read Shakespeare. And when they went to the theater, was, well, what are you going to go see? Well, there ain't much other than Shakespeare. So you go and you see a Shakespearean play, or you read it, and people read that, and they read the Bard, and they got their legends. And so they would refer to Hamlet, something foul in the state of Denmark. And somebody would quote that, and you knew what they were talking about. So this kind of became our legends and our stories. And today, we don't have bards per se. We have bards, but their names are like Steven Spielberg. They produce movies, and these movies enter into our consciousness as our legends and our stories. So I could say to you something like, use the force, you know what I'm referring to, or don't go over to the dark side, or he's on the dark, oh, he went over to the dark side. Or I could say, oh, he's a red shirt. You get the reference. These become part of our legends and our stories, because movies fulfill that function now, that functionality. And I believe that these three movies in particular really entered into the American psyche and our consciousness, into the popular culture. As a kid, I saw all three movies, but not in the movie theater. They were on broadcast TV. And then when we had cable, I saw them. I must have seen at least one. I must have seen on cable when we got cable in the house. And I probably shouldn't have seen these movies because they freaked me out. I was the older kid. My sister had to go to bed. My parents would be in the dining room with the neighbors playing cards. And so I'm left alone to my own devices in front of the TV. And I watched, and these movies freaked me. Couldn't stop watching them though. Could not, yeah, because you want to find out what happens, so in The Exorcist, that head spinning and projectile vomit, I mean, you just can't even draw your eyes away from that. It's like, so I know that they freaked me out, and they were part of our American psyche at a period of time. So it presented these thoughts and ideas, and it was really foundational. This laid a foundation for people to think that satanic ritual abuse really does happen, because we've seen it happen in our legends and our stories, i.e. movies, which we know are not true, but yet people bought into them. Also, another point on this is that later on, a scholar named Joseph Laycock was studying the accounts of hypnotized patients by therapists to recover memories of satanic ritual abuse. And one of the things he discovered was is that overwhelmingly it seemed that these patients were recovering memories that, oh, let me shift my notes here, they're just off the screen. They seem to be recalling scenes from these movies. Now you could say, well, maybe the movies were kind of recording actual real things. And I don't think so. And the reason why I think we need to give Joseph Laycock a lot of weight with the research he did on this is that you had thousands of hours of police investigation into these reports of satanic ritual abuse, killings, ritual killings of people, and they found zero evidence of any of it being at all authenticated. So, in the fact that you had thousands of hours of police investigation, nothing is turned up. And then you have this scholar does this deep dive into these accounts of the hypnotized patients recounting, and he's like, man, it really seems like they're just recounting scenes from those movies. So for that reason, I give a lot of weight to Joseph Laycock's research. Because you could say one thing, but just there's nothing there. It's a big old nothing burger. So that's one foundation, and without this idea entering into the larger culture that satanic cabals are out there, you wouldn't have got what happened in the 80s. It just wouldn't. It laid the foundation for it. So that's number one. Number two, you had in 1974, the Attorney General of New York labeled the Children of God cult as dangerous and abusers of children. That's 1974. And just 4 years later, Jim Jones, 1978, you have Jim Jones and the People's Temple do their mass suicide. Now, I've actually found the whole Jim Jones story to be really fascinating and watched a couple of different documentaries on it, but there was just horrific sexual abuse of adults, teens, children going on there. So as this story developed, and you had two very famous cults where there was abuse, and obviously these are dangerous cults, especially when you get the People's Temple doing a mass suicide. Yeah, obviously, so this whole idea of cults and abuse of children started to enter into the public consciousness, and there became a rising anti-cult movement. There was a lot of people in the church, out of the church, and social work. There was a lot of people across the spectrum who were very concerned about anti-cults and concerned about the fact that there was a lot of hinky stuff going on in some of these cults. So this was entering into the general public consciousness here in the US, and this was one of the foundations that fed into what was going to come about during the 1980s. And then you get Dungeons and Dragons is created 1974. So all of these dates are all interspersed with each other. Dungeons and Dragons created 1974. AD&D Monster Manual is published in 77. Player's Handbook in 78, and the Dungeon Master's Guide in 1979. Well, 1979, August 15th, 1979, which happened to be right around Gen Con, if I'm not mistaken, James Dallas Egbert leaves his dorm room after writing a suicide note. And so we get the James Dallas Egbert situation. He's missing for a period of time. The parents get fed up with the police, and they hire William Dare, who is what I've called him in the previous video, and he goes into the kids' dorm room, and he sees D&D materials, and he doesn't know what D&D is about, but he decides to blame the disappearance on D&D. And this hits the news. So it was William Dare who was the first person to identify D&D as, ooh, D&D leads to suicide. Yeah, he's the one who planted that seed. So that is our third foundation. So you have these um, movies, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, The Omen, that present an idea of Satanism being widespread in America. You have a rise of dangerous cults being identified as abusers of children. And that's creating a foundation of, ooh, we need to be more concerned about, child abuse, and, religious child abuse at that. And then you have William Dare comes out as a media whore to the news media and says that D&D led this kid to attempt suicide, and and so that lays the foundation for what is going to come in the 1980s. Now, sure, there was a rising political activism in religious organizations. That is not foundational to the Satanic Panic. Okay. Now, that might have helped feed into some of what went on, but it was not foundational. And without the other foundational elements, you could have had rising political activism in religious organizations and no Satanic Panic. You also had the rise of the anti-cult movement going on with across many spectrums, and that certainly was foundational. You had the appearance of the Church of Satan and explicitly satanic groups, but again, that's not really foundational to the Satanic Panic. But it certainly did make people go, see, more evidence that there's a satanic cabal out there trying to destroy our society. And this was just really countercultural elements going, yeah, let's start a Church of Satan, and just to be different, I think. So you also had a rising awareness of the need for social work and the protection of children. And, this rising awareness was coming about within the social work and would lead to some interesting developments in the 80s that I'll talk about in the next video. But that was not foundational to the Satanic Panic. And certainly the need to protect children from child abuse is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing for social work to be concerned with that. And then finally, there was this dawning realization about what PTSD was, because Vietnam was a thing and it was in our recent history, and we were just really beginning to understand what was going on with PTSD. And part of what goes on with PTSD, as I understand it, and I say this from somebody who had a close friend who snapped on me and tried to stab me, so I have some up close personal with it, but there's a repression of bad memories. They get pushed down and pushed down, and when they do come up to the surface, they come up, and it can be kind of ugly. And in the case of my friend who tried to stab me, that was kind of a ugly, scary situation. And I think for a lot of the veterans who came out of Vietnam, that was an ugly, scary thing for them. That they pushed down a lot of that. And so there was this rising recognition of what PTSD was, and that suppressing memory could have bad effects. And so there were many different attempts to try to begin to address that, and that was going on. And that kind of fed into this recovered memories movement. It's completely different than what's going on with PTSD, because the people really who have PTSD are really aware of what they went through, even though they push it down. And the recovered memories are like, you have no memory of it, but we'll recover it under hypnotism and under suggestion. We can bring that out. And so this was a thing in the 80s. It eventually was discredited, and it's no longer a thing in social work and therapy. after the mid late 90s and now in the new millennium. So this rising understanding of what PTSD is and suppressed memories certainly might have fed into some of what was going on with this quest to find, um, you know, lost, repressed memories, but it was not foundational to it. You know, you you could have still had the PTSD understanding going on and no satanic panic. So a lot of things actually did feed into and interact with the satanic panic, but not all of them are foundational. The three foundational are those movies putting Satanism into the popular culture, the William Dare identifying Dungeons and Dragons as the cause of James Dallas Egbert III's attempted suicide, and eventually he did succeed tragically. So that was a foundational thing, and then the the rise of cults and the public consciousness that these cults were doing bad things to children. And so this rising consciousness was coming about. And that was certainly foundational to what would come in the 1980s. So this is Tom for Tabletop Tap Room. Those are my foundations of the Satanic Panic. Remember, there's four groups, but really there's a fifth who participated, journalists, and then there's the sixth that we shouldn't forget because they often do get forgotten, and that's nerds and gamers who were preyed upon by some of the groups in all of this mix. So thanks for watching the video. Thanks to my subscribers. You guys are great. Don't forget that like, subscribe, and bell icon. Help me build the channel. And again, keep on gaming. Come back for the other videos. This was really fascinating research. I got much further this time around than I did back 2008, 2009. I really do hope you'll come back for the other videos.